what is the BASON? What is the edge that the BASON has in terms of polling and predictions that isn't seen in the industry?
It's combining the wisdom of crowds with the network analysis. So these are the two approaches. So there's two elements to the BASON, right? The wisdom of crowds is what we said, right? So I ask you not what you think, just who's going to win, but also who do you think other people around you in your community, in your environment, your friends, relatives, whatever, who they think is going to win. The second part is the network analysis, right? So that's kind of the crucial part, because it tells us how likely you are to be a good predictor. If you're in an echo chamber, I'm very likely to discount your opinion. But if I want to get like the mean predictability of the group, I want to look at the homogeneous groups. I want to look at people that have a much higher probability of being correct. That's the crucial element here. And so when you get that, when you combine that with the wisdom of crowds, you can extract the correct signal. You can extract the truth.
Welcome to the OrcaPod. I'm Scott Alford. If you are interested in conversations around predictions, around social science research, and around network analysis, this is the place for you. Please join us by subscribing or participate in our survey competition where we predict weekly markets. Looking forward to having you on board. I know that some of the recent work that you've been doing is around predictions, how predictions are made, how predictions are thought through. And I know that one of the big things you've done is you've taken on some of the traditional methods of polling, right? Polling's been done the same way for years and years, for generations now. But you and your team said, maybe we can do something different. So I want to start this conversation by talking about the big reveal. What you and your team did with Brexit, with predicting Trump in the 2016 election, really put you and your team on the map. What did you do differently? What did you see differently that the pollsters missed, that they got wrong?
A lot of things. What we noticed is that polling has as a method of generating public opinion and also potentially predicting, but it's not their primary cause, obviously, because polls are only like snapshots of voter attitudes over time, voter or consumer attitudes. And it has been working well ever since they figured out how to do like statistically representative samples, and that has been since the 50s, the 60s, etc. And you could really count on polls being good and accurate. But we noticed that in the past, so like we're talking now before the Brexit and the Trump election, in the decade before, running up to that, we noticed that polls are getting worse and worse in predicting not just political outcomes, but also predicting like demand for products and a bunch of different things. So in general, we're talking about polls being not as reliable as they used to be. And we try to figure out why. And one of the most important reasons is because, again, relating to what we talked about in one of our other conversations, the rise of IT technology and the whole new industrial revolution and everything, we're talking about people shifting where they are and how they behave on social media, on online essentially, versus how they used to behave before. For example, so before, if you were a pollster, you would call people on their landline phones, right? And you would get a very decent representative sample this way. And this worked, and it was very successful and it was very accurate. But in the past, since basically the late 2000s, landline phones have been, no one's using it anymore, right? People are using cell phones. And the thing is, when pollsters started switching from landline phones to first of all, landline phones are going to be, if you're calling people on landline phones, it's going to be woefully unrepresentative, because you're going to get people that are stay-at-home moms, unemployed people, retirees, right? So this is not a representative population. And if you try to surpass this by introducing mobile phone, calling people on the mobile phones, what we noticed is that, what researchers noticed, that people are not likely to give the same type of responses on your mobile phone, on your cell phone, because it's considered to be more of an invasion of privacy. Right? So when you're at home and you get back in the, let's say, the 90s, so you get a phone call at your home, and then it's a survey, can we ask you a question? Sure, let's go, right? But if you're somewhere outside and someone's calling you on your cell phone, you're likely to blow them off, right? And this has been the case. So response rates to telephone surveys have gone down dramatically. I'm talking about, this is something that the Pew Research Center has found, and Harvard Business School has done this research, and they have found that the response rates to telephone polls back in the 90s were about 40-45%. Back before that, in the 80s, 70s, even larger, right? We're talking over 50% response rates. In the period of the early 2010s, they've fallen to less than 9%. In most cases, less than 5%. So think of it, what that means. That means if in order to get a representative sample of 1,000 people, right, without, let's say, a 50% response rate, you need to call 2,000 people. In order to get the same 1,000 people now, you need to call 9,000 people, right? If the response rate is 9%, or if it's lower, if it's 5%, you need to call even more people, which significantly increases the costs, right? So the economic imbalance is there. You're not going to do the polls if you need to call so many people just in order to get a sort of a representative sample. And as we said, it's not happening because you're getting people who are more biased. So one of the responses to that was, let's do online polls, right? Let's try to target people online. But that is also a very biased group, right? Extremely. Because with online polling, you're going to get people that are more educated, more likely to be online, especially before, like we're talking about early 2010s. This is mostly young people are online, right? Early 2000s, 2010s. Now it's all sorts of people, but back then it was mostly younger. And with these crowds, they're more educated, more urban populations and younger. So it's also a biased sample, and you're going to get them biased towards certain other social outcomes or political preferences. And so when you have these two problems, what the pollsters try to do is they try to build models. And when you're building models, it's not the same as you're doing like with the standard representative samples, right? Because you're trying to build a model that's going to create an as-if representative sample. The best example of that is there was New York Times did this experiment. They commissioned a survey, so just responses from a survey, which is like raw data, and they sent it to 5 different pollsters in Florida. This was done for the Hillary versus Trump election in 2016, and 5 different pollsters gave them 5 different results. So it's the same data set, right? So same responses of people, but different pollsters are weighting them differently. So for example, if you have this many Latino voters and there's supposed to be more of them, so you're giving them a higher weight, lower weight, more white voters, educated, lower, higher educated, based on income stratification, whatever, right? So different pollsters applying different models to create as-if representative samples, but they're not representative samples anymore. That's the thing, right? So the methodology is getting worse because you're no longer able to get a classic standard representative sample in the way you used to do in the 90s and before. Now you're stuck with these bubbles, online polls, biased telephone polls, and you're trying to find new methodologies to fix this, and you're doing it with models. But when you're doing it with models, you will have higher errors. So this is why the errors reported by pollsters are wrong. They're still reporting, we get a representative sample, so the error is plus minus 3%. Not if you use models. If you use models, you need to add the model error to the error of the sample, which means that their errors are about 7 to 8%, right? Which could very much explain why we have such divergent outcomes with respect to what the pollsters is giving you. Now, this was a big problem in the early 2010s, and we noticed this, and we said, let's do something else, right? Let's see if we can move beyond representative samples. So not trying to get a standardized representative sample, which is very important if you need whatever survey you do in science, in social sciences especially, you need representative samples. But in this particular case, it was, let's try to move beyond that. Let's see if there's something else. So that was our primary motivation.
Okay, so one of the things you talked about was these aggregators and how there are errors that are introduced when, like, there's a margin of error that's introduced in terms of the actual polls and trying to get the representative sample, but then in the modeling and in the aggregation, there's also introduced other layers of errors. Could you talk a little bit about how that works to somebody who maybe doesn't work in the industry of polling? Like, what matters in terms of those layers of errors that you're stacking?
Yeah, I mean, again, so the perfect survey is a perfectly representative sample of the population. In statistics in general, there's a population that you want to ask something, right? And obviously you cannot go around and ask the entire population something. That you're not going to ask 100 million people. You want to get a representative group, which is very small, which is going to be 1,000 individuals or a couple of thousand. The bigger the better, obviously, because there's the more statistical power to your analysis. And so in that case, you're trying to mimic the whole population with your little representative sample. That's how it works, right? And if you get a good representative sample, your errors are going to be very low, because in that case, the mean response of the people in the sample are going to be identical to the mean response of the population. In theory, yes. In practice, yes, if you get a good representative sample. But as I said, it's hard to do that. So if you introduce anything to try to build that sample as if it was representative, you're immediately introducing errors. And pollsters they don't even know what they're doing in that specific sense, right? Because they are introducing, when using a model to weight things differently, you're introducing an error. You're kind of, think of it this way: you're adding, like, you're murking the waters, right? You're adding stuff in there, which is kind of giving you not that much of a clear picture. That's the problem, right? Because that's the idea of using models is, I mean, that's the best they can do, obviously, but it's necessarily going to give you a worse result than when you have a clear and beautiful, clear representative sample. Again, it's hard to get them. I know, and that's that's the problem that the polling industry is, in our opinion, unable to fix, at least to an extent that it's accurate. Obviously, you're going to get some accurate polling here and there. Obviously, if they increase the size of the sample, they're getting better samples, and then they can resort to their normal models and be successful. But that's costly, right? You can't every time get a sample of 10,000, 20,000 people. That would be ideal, but it's difficult to do that. Which is why you need to resort to models, and this is increasing the errors. And that's, in our opinion, a big problem.
So you and your team predicted 2016 for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2020, you predicted it for Biden, but without a blue wave.
Mm-hmm.
So what were you able to see in your models that other pollsters missed in the models and the aggregations that they created?
When I said that we were moving beyond representative samples, this was very important to do, and especially in those contexts, right? In the context of the Trump election in 2016, the Brexit 2016, and Biden 2020. It's because we can. So what we did is we said, all right, so instead of doing the standard survey where I ask you who you're going to vote for, and then based on your demographics and whatever, your characteristics, I'm going to assign a certain weight to you. We said, let's do this differently. Let's ask them a probabilistic question. Let's ask them a question: who do you think is going to win? Is it going to be Trump or Hillary? Let's go back to that context, right? And so what we noticed is that, I read a lot of research about this back in 2016. A lot of people were hiding their preferences, right, to pollsters. So when pollsters were calling them, they weren't comfortable in saying that they're going to vote for Trump, for example, right? And this created this bias in the polls, saying, all right, so not a lot of people are voting for Trump. They're either undecided or voting for Hillary. But then what we can see is, so because of the probabilistic question, you can say whatever you want, who you're going to vote for. But when I ask you who you think is going to win in your district or in your state, that gives us a much more precise answer. Because I ask you, all right, so maybe you're a Trump voter or a Hillary voter, doesn't matter, but I ask you who's going to win in your state, and you say, well, all I see around my backyard are Trump signs. Trump is clearly winning. And that gives us a much stronger signal than you saying I'm a Hillary voter in that particular state, even if you are, right? Same thing we noticed for Brexit. So in Brexit, and this was back before we didn't have a lot of resources, so I was distributing a survey among my friends. Most of them lived in London, and almost all of them are voting Remain, right? So voting for Britain to remain in the EU. But with that question, when you ask them about what other people, what your relatives, so that was like, what is your family going to vote like in the Brexit referendum? And they're like, yeah, I'm from up north in Yorkshire, whatever. And they're all going to vote leave. So even this person in a regular survey, this person would be classified as a Remain voter. But with our survey, it's classified, so his response to us is Remain is winning, leave is winning, not Remain. You see, so that's the idea. So by getting to ask them about the second question, to ask them about the preferences of the people they hang out with, gives us a much stronger predictability. Okay, but it's not enough, right? So in addition to that, we also need the network element, right? So the wisdom of survey is great, but the wisdom of survey alone would not have given us correct answers, neither for Brexit, neither for Trump, believe it or not. What we needed to see is the groups that these people hang out with. And that's where the network element comes in. Because with the network element, I can see that some people are connected to like-minded individuals, so the clusters, the bubbles that we talked about, right, in the previous one of our previous conversations, and also people that are in the more heterogeneous groups that kind of have different worldviews. So some people are, like left-wing bubbles or right-wing bubbles, and they only see one version of the world, their own, right? Trump is definitely winning, Hillary is definitely winning, right? One of those groups is going to be right, but not for the reasons, right? The obvious reasons. But I want to see the people in between, right? The heterogeneous group. Some of your friends are left-wing, some of them are right-wing, some of them are centrist. That means you have a higher probability of being right. And that's what we do, right? So we play with probabilities as different weights for trying to figure out how to make a good prediction, how to extract a good prediction, how to extract a signal. So I can have a survey in which we did. So it was an online survey. The majority of the respondents in our surveys were Hillary voters, for example, in the US election. So I had like 60% Hillary, 40% Trump, something like that, right? Brexit's the same thing, like over 60% remain, 40% leave. But the prediction was different. The prediction was 52% leave, 48% remain, and Trump winning in the crucial swing states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida. So that came from the prediction, not from the structure of the survey. So if I did the standard pollster approach, I would have been wrong as they were wrong, right? For all the same reasons. But with our approach, with our probabilistic approach and the network approach, you get a much, much more precise answer.
So your team, you, Dan, and Mile, came together. You described yourselves as political junkies who wanted to take a different approach. What prompted you to explore a different approach, and what did you learn in the process of trying to move beyond representative samples?
Our different backgrounds played a big role here. So we are, as you said, political junkies. That was the kind of the cohesive factor. So Dan is a physicist, Mile is a computer scientist. They were both, I'm an economist, political economist, and all three of us were working in the academia, teaching, right? They were professors, I was a lecturer. And our logic was, there's something here because let's develop this new methodology of trying to predict things. So what we first did is, because we were talking about polls being inaccurate. So what we wanted to do a sort of like a Nate Silver thing for Croatia, where we come from. And that kind of morphed into this whole idea of, scratch that. We have something even better than that. We have this great methodology. We were testing it on students first. And we were looking at student test scores in one of the classes that we were running, asking students to predict their test scores. And we found that the level of predictability was very high because we knew who's friends with whom, so we can draw the networks. And we were asking them, like, how much are you going to get? How much do you think that other people in your class are going to get? And when you saw the precision, it was incredible. And then we said, all right, let's test this on elections. So we did the first elections in Croatia. Again, really, really good precision. And then we said, all right, now it's time to go to, get to the big game and do Brexit and Trump. And the whole thing was it was about a year and a half, this whole process. It was a learning experience. It was initially an academic paper, but then it kind of transformed the methodology, the code that we've written transformed into a business model. And it's a business now.
Yeah, and you don't sell the formula to Coca-Cola.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, we're keeping it very tight. I mean, I talk about it a lot, sorry. And people think they have a good idea of how it works. By all means, if you want to replicate, go ahead. I think that would be helpful for thinking about social outcomes. But it's not that easy because of the network element that we basically innovated.
Yeah. So or maybe I should ask, what role did the fact that you are a political economist, Mile is a computer scientist, and Dan is a physicist, how did you all having very different perspectives, but yet all having this unifying theme, how did that make a difference in the kind of model that you ended up building when you said you were trying to recreate 538 and what Nate Silver was doing? How did you end up so far from an aggregator into let's come up with a completely new methodology?
Yeah, because we noticed that the models are faulty. Because even if you aggregate, if you aggregate bad polls, then you get a bad outcome. That's what happened to Nate Silver with the Trump prediction, because they didn't make a good Trump prediction because they were aggregating polls that had these issues, right? So Silver and 538, they had great predictions for Obama in 2008 and 2012. They were very accurate, but then with Trump, the whole thing fell apart. And then with Biden, again, okay, they predicted correctly Biden, right, as we did, as most people did. But it was about what you mentioned before. It was not a blue wave, right? There was no blue wave. We were saying it's going to be much tighter. And we were saying from the start that Trump is going to take Ohio and Florida and Texas, whereas most pollsters were giving all these free states to Biden, if you remember, right? Especially Florida and Texas, right? Ohio was kind of borderline. But what we were saying, no, this is all going to go to Trump. And usually, and you know this from American political history, if you get Ohio and Florida, you're very likely to win an election. No one ever lost an election if they lost. No one ever lost an election if they won Florida and Ohio. But it's happened in 2020. And we were saying this is the first time this is going to happen because we know that Biden is going to win Pennsylvania and all the northern states, Michigan and Wisconsin and Wyoming, in addition to New Mexico and whatever, and Georgia, which eventually became his as well. So it was a question of, refining this thing. We were saying it's not going to be, as you guys think, it's not going to be a blue wave. It's not going to be an overwhelming majority for Biden. Biden is going to win, but it's going to be much like, and we were saying, we were actually selling our predictions then to a bunch of clients in different industries, finance as well. And we were warning them, you're going to get electoral uncertainty on election night because Trump is going to win these two states, and the votes are going to be counted in Pennsylvania and all these northern states later, right? And as you know, right? And it took about a couple of days to confirm Biden, and we were saying exactly this, right? Trump is going to win it on the 9th, but in later days, all these northern states are going to go to Biden, and he's going to take the election. That's how I know it wasn't stolen, because we predicted it.
So so you're telling me, though, I mean, I was born and raised in Ohio. You're telling me I can no longer say, so goes Ohio, so goes the nation.
Well, it was disturbed. That was the only election. Maybe it could have been an outlier. We'll see this election cycle, but I think that one could have been an outlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I'm curious about, you had different kinds of respondents when you're talking about Brexit, when you're talking about predicting 2016, 2020. What role did you see the level of education of the participants playing in their ability to predict? Is that the edge that you all have?
The education of our participants, so the people who are, no, not at all. It wasn't that important. So I mean, it was, so it's not about your level of education, it's about your positioning in the network. That's much more important, right? So you can be a very smart person, but be in a very, bubble, living a cognitive bubble, and you're gonna get very bad predictions. I'll give you an example. When I came to Oxford, when I did my PhD, I always like to say this example because it's a perfect one. It's a perfect it's an echo chamber, right? It's a very left-wing echo chamber.
Oxford's an echo chamber?
Yeah, no. Believe it or not. Yeah. And I noticed that, so I came to Oxford in 2016. It was September. I started my PhD there then. And I remember going to these panels and discussions and whatever, and you had all these top professors, distinguished professors at these panels. And they couldn't figure out why Brexit happened. They were their primary concern was, don't these people realize that we're going to lose our grants, EU grants? To which, I was thinking, do you think that anyone in urban, rural Liverpool or Manchester cares about your grants? No one cares, right? And that's why they didn't vote to that extent. So that's what I'm saying, right? So they see the world from their perspective, and it's great to be at a university. You're doing amazing stuff. You're getting grants, and all of a sudden these crazy people are voting to leave the EU, and we're losing all that. Yeah, but you're not going into the reasons of why this is happening, and they couldn't explain it to themselves, and which just kind of got me thinking. This is an echo chamber. It's a classic example. These people are super smart. All of them, every one of them is super intelligent and top of their fields, and yet they can't see something that's so obvious, simply because of who you're surrounded with. So it doesn't have to do with your intelligence or your level of education. It's clear, right? It has to do with who you're surrounded with.
So I want to get your reaction to a quote by Nate Silver. Mm-hmm. So Nate Silver, right, previously of 538, commented on the inherent uncertainties in polling post the 2020 election.
Right.
He said, quote, "I'm amazed that polls are as good as they are, given the challenges of getting respondents." So what is your take on his perspective regarding the inherent limitations and surprises in polling accuracy, given the modern constraints.
Again, so he's right in a sense. It is extremely challenging. So with respect to that specific part of the quote, yeah, I would agree that so they are good with respect to the challenge of how hard it is. As we said, right, the response rates are so low, super low, so it's very difficult to even get a decent prediction, and they're able to get like decent predictions. It's not as good as it was before, and sometimes this can be, when you have very close elections, this can be very, as I said, like errors are not 3% anymore, and this is something that they're refusing to admit. The errors are much, much larger. So I think it would be much more fair if they reported errors of 7 plus 8%. But then again, think of you're commissioning a survey and someone says, it's about 52-48. The error is 8%, which means it can be like 60-40, and it can be like 60-40 in the other direction, right? So it's not very helpful to report such high errors. But I think that would be, academically, not academically, but it would be like in terms of integrity, it would be the right thing to say. So yes, it is definitely true that it's very difficult for them to get a representative sample. And given that, they're doing a good job in terms of getting at least some decent predictability out there. But it's not, what we need. It's not the right outcome. And I think that the industry is still very much entrenched and stubborn, because I know that since we had a company before the fund, we had a company that was doing market research, and I know that a lot of people are still kind of clinging on to these traditional polls, and I think they're oblivious to what's going to happen to them, to be honest, right? We didn't decide to go in that direction, to continue our company in that direction, because I saw a bigger opportunity with markets, predicting markets, and starting a hedge fund. And I mean, it's not something that we kind of willingly wanted to go into. Not the market. We wanted to go into competing with the pollsters in their areas. You live in your world, fine, I'll live in mine. We'll compare the results at the end. So we kind of moved away from that. But to kind of go back to his quote, I think he's right, but also I think he's right for the wrong reasons. Not right for the wrong reasons. It's like this is not doing any help for the industry, right? So just tap each other on the back saying we're doing a good job despite the terrible numbers. No, I think you need to innovate and think of something different.
So they're clinging on, and you decided to innovate. But once you've innovated in the industry, you decide to up and leave.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. We'll revisit that. But let's talk about the BASON approach, the Bayesian adjusted survey of networks. Talk a little bit about what is the BASON, what is the edge that the BASON has in terms of polling and predictions that isn't seen in the industry.
So it's what we talked about, right? It's combining the wisdom of crowds with network analysis. So these are the two approaches. So there's two elements to the BASON, right? The wisdom of crowds is what we said, right? So I ask you not what you think, just who's going to win, but also who do you think other people around you in your community, in your environment, your friends, relatives, whatever, who they think is going to win. Or in the case of markets, where the market is going to end up by the end of the week. The second part is the network analysis, right? So that's kind of the crucial part, because it tells us how likely you are to be a good predictor, right? So whether you're going to be in a group that's more biased or less biased, right? So what we talked about, if you're in an echo chamber, I'm very likely to discount your opinion. I mean, you're probably going to matter in issues like, so we did some surveys on like the COVID responses and the vaccination. So in those particular cases, I want to look at echo chambers because I want to look at how their opinions are formed. But if I want to get like the mean predictability of the group, I want to look at the homogeneous groups. I want to look at people that have a much higher probability of being correct. That's the crucial element here. And so when you get that, when you combine that with the wisdom of crowds, you can extract the correct signal. You can extract the truth, right? The true signal, much better than you can from just using regular polls or even just the wisdom of crowds, which has been some pollsters I noticed that have been introducing wisdom of crowds, but it's not enough, right? You need this element. Now, this is what we did for elections, and it was fantastic. But for markets, we added an additional element, which is performance over time. Because we do these surveys every week, right? Every week we ask people predict the level of the S&P 500 by the end of the week and a bunch of other market indicators. And then we have to see we have to track them over time. So I can see you enter into the survey, and let's say you're in a heterogeneous group, and you have a higher probability of being good, but then your performance over time is dwindling. You're being worse and worse. And then I'm going to cut all right, so maybe you had a higher probability initially, but now your probability is kind of going down, right? You're not as good as the model would predict initially. And same thing vice versa. If I find someone who's in an echo chamber, but they're actually kind of pretty good, this doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. But the point is, we definitely notice that people who are in heterogeneous groups tend to be better at predicting whatever, and markets included.
So for those that don't know, do you actually see people moving in the survey? Like, do some people become, say, more polarized or move towards an echo chamber? And do you see people moving out of echo chambers?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, so when we did this for issues on COVID, which we kind of did regularly, then we can see these clusters moving around, right? From like initially, and this is like, we saw this specifically initially, the support for governments during COVID in the first month, the first 2 weeks was enormous, right? Across the West. So we did it in EU and US. The support for governments was immense, almost uniformed. And then over time, you can see how this was separating, right? You can see how these clusters were forming, and then people started saying, what are you doing? Why is this happening like this, blah, blah, blah. And you can see this divergence. And the same thing happened with vaccines, right? As initially, we need them. That's very important for the economy to kind of reopen. And then eventually it's kind of, you have, again, these two huge clusters not really being connected to each other, saying, anti-vax, pro-vax, and there's no nothing in between, which is fascinating, right, in itself. With markets, it's not as much, because it doesn't derive such an emotional response. There is a strong psychological element to being like either bearish or bullish. You're thinking, the market, that's it, they're going down, or no, it's going up, it's going to, to the moon. And there is a strong emotional response there, but they're different levels, right? This one is more anger, so politics, the vaccines, COVID is more anger, and this one is more like pure emotion. Like I can say maybe this is anger, this is happiness. I don't know. We haven't tested this. This is just like my hypothesis. But yeah, so we noticed that these clusters, when they form and people do move around, but with markets it's kind of less. It's more about tracking the precision of their performance. So I'm tracking whether or not you're being actually good at predicting markets over time, right? So I know that. So with elections, it's always one point in time. With markets, it's always a trend.
So it's easy to talk about the psychology of the crowd.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the psychology of your team.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that moment in which you have modeled the 2016 presidential election for Trump.
Yeah.
You know that Trump is at least perceived as a polarizing figure.
Yeah.
He is not very popular. And even you've said you're in conversations with and in community with folks at Oxford that are in this left bubble. How did you as a team roll out these predictions, and how did you discuss them with your friends that might have had a very different perspective on what the outcome was going to be on the night of the elections in November?
I mean, I remember I was watching with a group of Americans in Oxford, and the night started off like a lot of fun, and it was enjoyable. But then, as the time was passing, I mean, it was clear that the whole, the group was getting more and more depressed, and I was kind of hiding my joy and excitement not because of Trump winning. I couldn't care less. I mean, there's obviously different levels here, but it was about us making a fantastic prediction. But the thing is, I think a couple of days before the election, so the election was on a Tuesday, right? I think on a Friday, we saw that the thing flipped, right? And it flipped towards Trump. And it flipped in the key states. It flipped in Pennsylvania, and flipped in Ohio and Florida. And we're like, okay, this is something, right? Let's see if it continues. And during the weekend, we were trying to get more people in to try to see if this holds. And the effect was getting stronger and stronger. So by the time by Monday, before we were before we had to call in the result, we said the model is saying Trump. We ran it over and over and over, and we're still saying Trump. And we're like, should we stick with this? Yeah, let's stick with this. If we're wrong, so what, right? We got it wrong. But if we're right, then it's the upside is huge. And so we came out with this prediction. I posted on my blog, and my friends saw it. I was posting on social media, and they were like, you're a smart guy and everything, but you don't know a lot about American politics. Yeah. I'm like, well, maybe I'm wrong. Well, we'll see. And it was about those key swing states, by the way, but Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida. This was the main divergence, and I was saying they were looking about. Nate Silver says it's going to be clear Hillary. I'm like, well, maybe we're wrong, and we were actually saying that Hillary is probably going to get more votes because we saw the distribution of outcomes that Hillary is going to get more votes, but Trump is going to win the key swing states. And that's what happened. And we're saying that's basically the result, right?
Now that's precision.
That's precision, absolutely. Yeah. And so, I was quite happy with that prediction and kind of, catapulted us into this whole, entrepreneurship essentially.
Okay. So I'm sure you lost a lot of friends, maybe made a lot of friends.
No, not at all. Not at all. It was not the, because I didn't have any strong political views to that end. Right? I was just like, we were doing our job. Let's do it better than anyone else.
Of course. Well, they say don't follow the crowd, but you're telling me in certain contexts, actually, you should glean from the wisdom of the crowds.
You should. I mean, that's the thing. Like people always kind of when they want to make fun of this, is like, but crowds aren't smart; they're stupid. Yeah, sure. I mean, they can be like sheeps, right? Sheep, sorry. But the thing is, you need to know how to extract the signal. As I said, like the wisdom of crowds in itself would not have been enough, right? You need a way of trying to figure out which people in that crowd are better, are like super forecasters, if you want to call them, like better observers of their environments. Because some people are clearly better than others, right? Some people don't see a lot of things happening in the future. They have their own worldview, and they're very kind of they're like this, right? They're very very centric towards their issues, and they don't have a wide enough space to observe. But other people do, and we want to try to find those people.
So one of the arguments that's commonly made in favor of affirmative action is that it introduces diversity into places like the academy, government, and a variety of places. So in the model of the BASON, do you find that diversity is really the key? And if so, are there specific types of diversity that matter more than others in the BASON model?
So diversity of opinions, absolutely. Yeah, that's the whole point. So we did one survey that we got wrong, actually. It was for another Croatian election, where we had a very biased group, right? Very biased. So like 80% was biased towards the left in that particular case, and we got a wrong outcome as a consequence. So we noticed that the group needs to be at least, like we call it quasi-representative. So you need to have, you can't let one group dominate, right? You need to have, because this was like picking in one big bubble. Right, and we're picking around that bubble, and you're not getting anything else except what the bubble wants, right? What the bubble thinks. So you need to get at least. That's why I'm saying the heterogeneity. That's why we figured out that the heterogeneity is the key here, right? It's not just the network itself, not just the model. It's the how you structure the network, right? That's why if I do a survey in politics and I see only only left-wing people coming in or only right-wing people coming in, I need to kind of balance it out. So for example, when we also did the French elections, Macron-Le Pen in 2017. And there we had the opposite approach. We had only Le Pen voters coming in initially. And it was very strongly biased towards Le Pen. And we were saying, okay, so now we know that we need to kind of, we need to get more Macron voters in, more left or centrist voters in order to get this balance, at least like a quasi-balance. And when this happened, the signal for Macron winning was clear. And it was a strong victory. It was 59-41, something like that, which was in line with our predictions for that election as well. So another successful election, right? But in terms of diversity, diversity of opinion. So it's very important to have a diverse group. I don't know. So we never ask for their sociodemographic data. So I don't know what gender they are. I don't know age. I don't know, income, whatever. I have no idea. Race, ethnicity. What I'm interested in is that they're uncorrelated, that they're decentralized. So they're all over the place, right? And that they're not correlated, not affecting each other. So that's what's important, right? Diversity of opinion arises from that element.
So you're saying not only are you not looking for a representative sample, you don't even know what the representatives in the sample look like.
For elections, we did ask those questions because we just simply wanted to see if it makes a difference, and it doesn't. That's the thing. It doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is how good you are and where you are in the group. That's what makes a difference, not your income, gender, age, whatever, right? Education. So we ask those type of questions.
Yeah, so it's through the testing and the iterating that you figured out.
Figure that out, yes. And for markets, we don't. That's why for predicting markets, we don't even ask those questions, because we want those people to enjoy their anonymity, and they don't have to give any data about themselves. Just like, give us your prediction. That's all you need.
So election predictions put you on the map.
Yeah.
What drove you from the industry to challenge pollsters to saying, you know what, that's not the sandbox that I want to play in. I want to play in a different and perhaps arguably a bigger sandbox. How did you and your team make that decision?
So I wanted to do it from the start. Do the market things from the start. But we simply didn't have enough resources, enough, let's say, experience, call it that, to try to do it. But so what I did is, I took a while to try to learn a lot about markets, trading on my own, doing like options trading, that sort of stuff. Before I would, and plus, we kind of building the company, I wanted to see, we wanted to get some resources and some jobs behind us so that we can have this sort of credibility, or this sort of proof of concept, call it, if you want to call it, whatever, experience. Yeah. So if you wanted to have that experience, before we were jumping into a new area. So we start initially with the company back in 2016. When we opened the company, we had elections and we had market research. That was the two things that we were doing. But then ever since after the Biden prediction, when we were successfully selling our predictions to others, we were saying, all right, now it's the time. Now we have some money. We finally have some resources. We can pay a few people to start a new survey doing just markets. And we've been doing that since 2021. So 2021 and 2022, and I was trading those signals from my own personal accounts, because by that time, so we had the resources and I had some experience in trading in markets, that we said now is the right time. And I think that whole thing, so it was always my idea to go into that direction. So I was always kind of, on the edge, but it was just a matter of, what's the right time? So when is the right time to do it? And the right time happened after COVID, right? Because it kind of, the two things. First of all, it got us a lot of attention in terms of the jobs that we did. So we made a lot of new surveys that were very useful for a bunch of clients. And then you had the election, and then there was this whole idea of us finally jumping into this, because the markets were ripe for doing something like that, right? During COVID, you had a lot of volume of retail traders coming into markets ever since like April 2020, especially later as you had this, tech bubble and everything. And 2021 especially was a great year for retail investors for a number of reasons. And I said, all right, now is the right time. Let's get to the retail crowd that we can finally get. Because in 2018, I don't think I would have been able to get to this retail crowd, right? The same way I was able to do it in 2021. So a lot of things kind of fit together, as they usually do, right? You have some strategy, and then you also have some luck. So a lot of things kind of fit together, and it was good for us. So because we had this group of retail traders that we could kind of survey every week. It was small initially, but then we were expanding it. And we were using this, sourcing the information, giving them prizes, paying them money, which we still do. And it's going to go up as well. We're paying even more money to our survey users. So using those signals to try to trade them to see if there's something there, right? And we were saying, let's invest into this project. If after 2 years nothing happens, if we're not earning any money, then we're kind of just shut it down and nice try, and that was it. Doesn't work for markets. But turns out, not only that it does work for market, it works incredibly well for markets.
So for those who want to cut their teeth on predictions, getting into the market, how can they participate in the BASON?
So we have our own survey app, the Oraclum predictions app. Where every week, so every Tuesday, it's open every Tuesday, 8 a.m. Eastern time. It's open for only 24 hours, and you can get into the survey, anyone from around the world. It's open for 24 hours, so you can get in at any point in time and give us your prediction about where the market is going to end up by Friday. When I say the market, I'm talking S&P 500, Dow Jones, NASDAQ, the 10-year bond yield, the VIX, which is the volatility index, and the Apple stock. Those are the 6 things that the 6 questions that we're asking, and from that we get our signals, and you get rewarded based on the precision of your responses. So there's two ways that we're kind of encouraging people to come in. So it's a survey competition. So you're competing with other individuals, and if you're better than them at predictions, you get money. Right? So there's $5,000 quarterly prizes distributed to the top 20 participants. So a lot of people can, so it's inclusive. A lot of people can get some money out of it, and a lot of people did. We've paid out over hundreds of prizes to over hundreds of people. Some of them are always there. Some of them are new coming in. And there's also the prize money at the end of the year. So by the end of every year, 3% of the fund's profits also get distributed to the top 20 participants over the whole year. So this way we're encouraging short-term precision and also long-term consistency, right? So you need to be consistent, you need to be in the survey, so we're rewarding that as well.
So you reward precision on the one hand,
yeah,
and consistency and involvement in the survey on the other.
Absolutely, yes. Those are the two things. And again, the prizes are decent, but as the fund grows, the prizes are going to grow. Obviously, we're going to increase this money, the monetary prizes. And our motivation there was, I was looking at Numer.ai. It's also like a prediction competition, not necessarily prediction, but like market. Maybe you can call it that. Started by this hedge fund, by people from Renaissance. It's a little different approach. So they give teams data, right? And they can use all this data and try to predict market signals. And the better ones get rewarded. They get paid in the cryptocurrency created by the Numer fund, right? And they can trade. There's an $800 million market cap for that currency, so they can trade it for actual cash. I think we're still too small to go down that route, so we're just giving pure cash, which is I think maybe even a better option. So the rewards, the monetary prizes, is what keeps people engaged and what keeps them in the survey. Also, there's bragging rights. People win competitions. They put it on Twitter, on whatever, Facebook, saying, I'm participating in this competition. I won. And it's always great and it's always fun. But we're building this ecosystem essentially. We're still at the beginning. There's still a couple of thousand people there, so we want to build it to tens of thousands of people. To have this ecosystem there of persistently good predictors that we keep rewarding, but there's also randomization there, right? If you're in there, if you're consistent, eventually you're going to make some money out of it. That's the idea.
All right, and you're competing against people all over the globe.
As a survey user, yeah. So I think like if you look at the structure, a lot of people from the United States, Canada, Europe, across Europe. We even have like Asia, South Africa, across the world.
All right, fabulous. Well, if someone is on the fence, if they're trying to decide whether or not to participate in the survey, and somebody's like, "Oh my word, what if I mess it up by my participation? I'm still learning markets." What would you say to that?
Yeah, go for it. I think it's a great exercise because if you want to start, let's say like a habit of following markets, then doing the survey is perfect, right? First of all, you can get rewarded, you can get some money out of it. And second of all, it kind of forces you to every week look at what's happening in the markets, and maybe you have a knack for it. Maybe you don't, right? So if you don't, no big deal. A lot of people tend to come in. So for example, my friends, I want to help you out, let's start a survey, but they're not really following markets, so their opinions are really not that important, so they drop out very quickly, right? But then other people are, I got the hang of this, so let's see if I'm good at this, and then they keep doing it and they keep following markets, and eventually you get hooked, like with every game. That's the idea. Yeah.
But it has a feedback mechanism,
Absolutely.
right? You can see where you are in the leaderboard.
Immediately. You have immediate verification, right? Well, not immediate, but by the end of the week, you see whether or not you were good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate these conversations, Vuk. Really interesting to hear about your experience with predicting Brexit 2016 in 2020. So looking forward to the next conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott.